Bulvinaka and welcome. My name is Fenton Lutunatabua. I organize alongside the Pacific Climate Warriors, a regional network of young Pacific climate organizers, activists, and campaigners. I work as 350.org's deputy head of regions, and I have the immense pleasure of being your moderator for this morning's regional conversation. As you might be aware, this is the fourth conversations of its kind in a series of conversations leading up to the Commonwealth People's Forum that will take place ahead of the biennial Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting hosted by Samoa this October. The People's Forum is the largest gathering of civil society in the Commonwealth and will be a culmination of these regional conversations that have provided a space for Commonwealth civil society to collaborate on ideas and solutions to regional challenges, as well as discuss shared goals for the People's Forum to build a more resilient, peaceful, democratic, and sustainable Commonwealth. During our time together this morning, we will be exploring some of the most urgent issues of our time, like climate justice, health justice, and freedom of expression, whilst also centering youth, gender equality, and small and vulnerable states. Before we get started, we wanted to share with you a slideshow of images from a stunning mural art project delivered by Seleka International Arts Initiative in Tonga, which was supported by the Commonwealth Foundation. Following the traumatic experiences arising from the volcanic eruption in January 2022 in Tonga-Tapu, artists from Seleka International painted more than 19 uplifting murals all around islands with support from the Commonwealth Foundation. This initiative was led by artist Tevita Latu, who with a core team of 9 other artists collaborated with the local community to bring their vision to life. The public art installation sparked many exciting conversations around art and its power among villagers and art enthusiasts alike. Seleka International is a nonprofit which aims to promote visual and performing art practices in Tonga and to contribute to the international exposure of Tongan arts and artists. Now, to give you a little bit more context of today's event, the countdown to the People's Forum 2024 actually began with the People's Voice, a critical conversation event that the Commonwealth Foundation hosted in November 2023. This event marked the halfway point and established a bridge between the People's Forum in Rwanda in 2022 and the upcoming People's Forum scheduled to take place in Samoa later this year in October. Now, the aim of this first Commonwealth-wide event is to provide a structured space for Commonwealth civil society to discuss the shared goals for CHOGM 2024, as well as the People's Forum, anchored in the values and principles of the Commonwealth Charter. As a reminder, here are the key asks and recommendations that came out of the People's Voice, a critical conversation event in November 2023. 1, nothing about us without us. This motto represented the overarching theme of civil society calling for inclusive decision-making that leaves no one behind. Also at this event, there was a call to agree to a declaration for people with disabilities to prioritize the rights and interests of disabled people. Secondly, fostering cross-sector collaboration and partnerships with civil society, governments, the private sector, as well as diverse communities to address the pressing issues of climate justice, health justice, and freedom of expression. Thirdly, creating and supporting capacity building platforms, specifically for civil society to share knowledge, best practices, and resources, as well as enhancing our ability to advocate and act on critical issues such as loss and damage funds and building health resilience. Now, under the themes of climate justice, there was a call to strengthen litigation and enhance the legal framework to penalize climate change violations. Under the theme of health justice, there's a call for enhanced accountability so civil society organizations could hold their governments to account. And finally, in terms of freedom of expression, there's a call for the need to strengthen media freedom across the Commonwealth, as well as a suggestion to establish a legal defense network specifically to support our journalists and media outlets. With that said, please join me in welcoming an incredible expert panel of advocates, cultural change makers, and the Commonwealth Foundation's grant partners who will set the scene for our small group discussions around the themes of health justice, climate justice, and freedom of expression. I'd like to invite the panel to please turn on their cameras as I introduce them. Firstly, Mary Rokonadravu, who is a Fijian story writer and dual winner of the Commonwealth Short Story Prize. Then we have Joseph-Zane Sikulu, a Tongan environmental, cultural, and queer activist, and the Pacific Managing Director of 350.org. And finally, Freda Willie, the Disability Inclusive Disaster Risk Reduction Officer at the Vanuatu Disability Promotion and Advocacy Association. I just want to take a quick moment to to specifically check in on Freda and just ensure that everything is okay with her camera and her mic. Vinaka Freda, if you could just have your camera on as well, that would be perfect. Thank you very much. Now, each of the panelists will ask to share the responses to 3 questions, and I'll ask the questions one at a time with space in between questions for each of the panelists to respond. If it's okay with the panelists, we'll also go in order of their introductions. So in that sense, Mary will kick off with you, followed by Joe, and then you, Freda. So the first question, what are the key priorities or challenges specific to the Pacific region that you have observed within your respective field of work?
Thank you, Fenton. And Bulavinaka to everyone joining us today. So Fenton, when it comes to the key priorities and challenges, in my observation, so a little about my background. I write fiction and nonfiction. I also work in the communication and knowledge management space in Fiji and in the region. So looking at that, given our time limits, I will focus on just 2 items to begin with. One is when we talk about freedom of expression, the focus is on the media. And I think in the Pacific region, the last report that I read, at least, this came out from PACMAS, the Pacific Media Assistance Scheme that was sponsored by the Australian government through DFAT. And in their assessment of 14 countries, they marked certain countries, I mean, the region is relatively safe when it came to it. So there are, I mean, moving from that, coming to now about 11 years later, I think what the region has faced is some of the larger countries and also smaller ones do have gone through draconian media laws. Fiji, for example, has gone through that. There is complexity in Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Tonga as well, and Samoa. So that's one of the things. The other thing is, I think one of the good things, though, is that we do have journalism courses, I think, that are run by institutions. In Samoa, for example, the National University, and then in Fiji, the University of the South Pacific and the National University, but the same occurs, I think, in Solomon Islands and Papua New Guinea as well. So having that for capacity building for journalists to have access to training and education, that is one of the things I think that helps the professionalization. But of course, much more is learned in practice in newsrooms and all of that. The second thing that I wanted to comment about was when we talk about freedom of expression, we do have the focus on media and journalism, safety of journalists and all of that, which needs lobby I think in more specific countries. And from my perspective, it shouldn't be done by one country, but we should have a regional approach that would work better when it comes to this. And also when it comes to freedom of expression, we need to look beyond just media and look at the arts as well, the creative arts. This is where literature is important, and the Commonwealth Short Story Prize plays a key role in that. And it now includes video elements and poetry, which I think is going to go far. So that is important. And I think the third point I just wanted to make very quickly is when it comes to freedom of expression, it includes the citizenry or ordinary people as well through social media, digital platforms. Where that is concerned, one of the key gaps is education. We do not have enough education when it comes to citizen engagement. And also we need to look at regulation of the internet and digital spaces as well. This is something that we are lagging far behind in Fiji and in the Pacific. So that's it from me to start with.
Mary, beautiful insights. Thank you. Joe, we'll come to you.
Thank you, Fenton. Malole, everybody. In terms of climate justice, I first just want to acknowledge that I looked through the attendees list that are here now, and so many of the people on that list are already doing this incredible work and already know what I'm about to say. But I did just want to quickly highlight in here the priorities that we see right now. All of the pieces of work being done across this region to achieve a rapid and equitable transition to renewable energy, to adapt to the climate crisis, to prepare our islands from disasters, and to make safe our homes. It's sometimes overwhelming because whilst we are trying to plan ahead and envision our future, there is still so much work to be done to address the historical impacts too. There are communities that are still rebuilding and recovering from disasters, from cyclones, from the volcanic eruptions and tsunamis, even from COVID. There are still communities waiting to be relocated. And despite the fact that our governments have plans and every one of our governments have really strong climate goals and roadmaps to renewable energy, they have adaptation plans, the biggest barrier and challenge we have is finance. Finance is the biggest barrier and the biggest challenge, not just for our governments, even more challenging for our community. So right now, as globally, we are thinking through the structure and implementation of things like the Loss and Damage Fund, and in our region, the Pacific Resilience Facility, we have to make sure that we are part of that process as much as possible so that our communities' needs are reflected in that, and so that in the process, we are also making sure that we take into account how it's going to impact them. I'm really loving the emergence of this new style of activism and advocacy in the Pacific, and that's a kind that's driven by communities who are out there organizing and campaigning, but also challenging and building models for things like finance mechanisms. And that all comes down to the fact that we need to get resources to our communities quickly, because we know that finance is a bridge to climate justice. And there are so many other priorities, but in this year, when we're focusing so much on that, and when we know that our communities need to see some real tangible changes quickly, the priority that we should be looking at going into these leaders' meetings is how do we get the resources to our communities quickly, and how do we do it in a way that doesn't burden them and make sure that it's accessible.
Beautiful. Freda, the floor is yours. Great, you're off mute now, Freda.
The challenges here in Vanuatu are when your stakeholders, disability stakeholders, there is positive people with disabilities here, but they found that people with disabilities are often left out in climate change and disaster reduction areas. For example, there's preparedness, response, and recovery, but when we do our work and consolidation to being done, we found out that people with disabilities are often included in response and recovery, but not preparedness. People with disabilities here in Vanuatu are always left out when it comes to preparedness. Somehow we work with the disability partners on trying to advocate for the persons with disability, especially in preparedness areas, trying to teach them advocate or show them what the needs of persons with disabilities are when it comes to preparedness, such as safe evacuation centers, we try to do the field simulations for them to learn how the needs of people with disabilities are addressed here in Vanuatu. Yeah.
Thank you, Freda, and for the panel for just highlighting the key priorities and challenges. We'll now move to our second question. So this one's a little bit longer, but the question here is, what are the innovative or creative approaches that you may have encountered or implemented to address climate-related risks, public health concerns, or challenges to freedom of expression? What lessons have you drawn from these examples? And finally, how could these successful initiatives either be scaled or adapted across the region and beyond? And we'll follow the same flow again, Mary. Thank you.
Thank you, Fenton. I think when it comes to innovation, I touched a little on that before. And just before I go into that one, I just wanted to add one more key challenge that comes in from the region in the Pacific. And it's probably not unique to us. But I wanted to mention that when we talk about freedom of expression, and we are given a safe space even within our countries to express, to freely express ourselves and have dialogue and all of that. One of our two of our key challenges, one is our tradition and culture, which does not really allow that, where we self-censor ourselves. And the second one is when it comes to faith. So faith can do two things. One is it can be used to run advocacy in a very powerful manner in the region. However, when it comes to freedom of expression, faith then also can lead us to not freely express ourselves because it's seen as disrespectful. And this is both through the Christian lens and also through tradition and culture. So that one, which I did not mention earlier. Now, coming to innovation, some of the innovative practices, one is and I touched on this earlier, for me as a writer, I do not feel that I was able to express myself or anything like that, even within my own country, until I was able to write and have it put out of Fiji, for example, because we were living in that sort of a political space. So the Commonwealth Short Story Prize was a key element in that. So I would say that one of the innovative practices, which can also touch on climate justice and health justice, especially if we are talking about things that are sensitive to our communities and governance. So literature plays, I think, a key role in that, as does the other creative art forms. And I'd like to say that the good thing is I think it has been used in the climate space. However, when it comes to the health justice space or the health space, not so much. There is a little use, but it could be improved. But that is one where, and there are varying degrees of it in the region, the use of the creative arts. And from my experience, the literature or creative writing in whatever form we do it. The second one is, I think when it comes to another innovation, and we probably don't do it enough in the freedom of expression space, is in looking at solidarity and the solidarity spaces. It's done pretty well, I think, in the climate space. And it's done, I'm not sure about the health space. I will have to listen to what people are saying in this platform. But I do know that in the freedom of expression space, or when it comes to media, the creative arts, we don't do it enough in the region. But that is an innovation that I've seen work in other regions, which should be able to work here. And I think that depends on how we organize. And I think the lessons for me are from the climate space, the lessons in organizing and gaining solidarity. So those two are important. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, the last point, I think, is when it comes to in the CHOGM 2022 communique from Rwanda, Item 11, which covered governance, human rights, and law, talked about the head stressing the importance of the right to freedom of expression. And it says through peaceful, open dialogue and the free flow of information, including through a free, independent, responsible, and pluralistic media, committed to democratic traditions and strengthening democratic processes. In the Pacific, given the challenges that I outlined earlier, I think this points to the importance of two things. One is, I'll go back again to the creative art forms. And the second one would be education, because we can talk about freedom of expression, but if we do not educate both ourselves and the young, including children, if we do not create those safe spaces, then engagement or expression in any form is going to be a huge challenge. And we need only go to social media to see the impact of that in our society. But like I said, so for me, those are some of the initial observations. And I think, so it would be solidarity seeking. That would be, I think it sounds pretty ordinary, but I think when we bring it to freedom of expression and all of that, looking at through the regional approach, we cannot do it in our small countries, but we can do it as a region. So I think that's going to work better, especially when it comes to media and freedom of expression, including the arts, of course, and literature. Thank you, Fenton.
Thank you, Mary. If I may, with just two quick follow-up questions. I'm curious around how would you describe what meaningful solidarity in this instance could look like for you? And secondly, I think what you mentioned around like this ability to fully express ourselves, right? Between like tradition and culture and like this thing around self-censoring, as well as faith. So my curiosity here is like, if you have any recommendations, or from your experience, how have you seen people, or have you yourself sort of reconciled that need to express yourselves as well as sort of be respectful in that sense?
Okay, so I think, thanks, Fenton, for the follow-up question. I think when it comes to tradition and culture, and this is where I think the contemporary art forms come in. Traditionally, of course, I mean, and even now, if you're an artist, you're basically working from the margins. You to some degree, you are critiquing the society or the community that you live in, and how that engagement happens. So this is why I'm saying the art forms, the creative arts, including writing and the other genres, are critically important to that engagement and critique from communities and peoples. Now, the first thing it takes is courage, of course, but I think we can talk about courage, but in today's environment, with say draconian media laws we had before, the communities, the very small Pacific Island communities we come from and live in on a day-to-day basis, that can be very stressful. This is why I'm talking about solidarity. So someone can be courageous, good enough, but how does that person have to live in society? Religion, especially Christianity, plays a huge role, has a lot of power in our communities. And I did mention it can go two ways. You either work it to do your advocacy. When it comes to freedom of expression and the creative arts, to a certain degree, it is also critiquing the faith-based and not faith-based and the churches as well. So that's another key challenge. So I think the critical thing, the important thing, Fenton, would be that we have the ability to have open dialogue and peaceful dialogue. That can also happen in social media. That can happen in an open and free media, but it's not done enough. And I suspect that one of the key challenges we have is that, and maybe this is not unique to the Pacific region only, but I talk about education, because a lot of people do not understand that when it comes to journalism and the media, it takes a news cycle to actually complete coverage on a particular issue as and when it arises. You cannot do it over one news article over a day or a week. So social media and the digital world, of course, does not give us that leeway anymore. So people forget that before, we would wait a day. Radio would pick up the small bits, but deeper analysis would come in newspapers and magazines, maybe. But we expect instant gratification. You want instant information. So there's no room to sit back and self-reflect and all of that. But if we had a better idea about the news cycle and how that pause and a space is important to our understanding and engagement, it will go, I think, a long way to creating that, even in the digital space. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Joe, we're going to come to you for your reflections on the second question.
I think a lot of what Mary said also applies to a lot of this work around climate justice, because creating space for people to have that freedom of expression and express how they're feeling about the climate crisis or their understanding of it, how they're experiencing it, what they're holding for it, is such an important thing to do. And to do that through music and art is one of the ways we've seen it innovate throughout all of this work. And just for example, I know Doris, I just saw Doris's name too. Brown Girl work I saw as I was flicking through the reels the other day. We're doing some great work with school children, giving them the platform of music to be able to express themselves and how they're feeling about things. In the Marshall Islands, they also do that too. In their consultations for the National Adaptation Plan, they're going out to their outer islands and engaging youth through music and art as a way for them to express what it is that they need or the future they want to see. And then that was all incorporated into their National Adaptation Plan. And that is a really innovative way to try to bring community into the process of creating these things. The other thing I want to also speak about too in terms of innovation is that our governments have been innovating on climate policy since forever. We've been leading on that in a global scale, and Vanuatu and Tuvalu have been doing that in such great ways. PIS, Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change, with the International Court of Justice advisory opinion. So many different ideas have led to see innovation in these policies. And also in the work that's happening around finance mechanisms. There is a network in the Pacific called Pacific Rising, which has just been convened by an organization called UUSC, the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. And it's a network of about 10 organizations. Te Tamamatoa, I know, is also on this call, a part of that too. And they're working at the moment to try and build a model of loss and damage in partnership with the Scottish Government and also the Climate Justice Resilience Fund, to figure out how governments can actually work directly with communities to get funding towards them in a way that is not burdensome, that doesn't require a whole bunch of paperwork, that takes into account how it impacts them on the ground, the understanding that our people don't have access sometimes to internet or to bank accounts, and to try and build a model around that. And the background to that is the Scottish Government made a commitment to about 2 million euros at COP a few years ago, and that filtered in to the Pacific through USC. And in the process, there've just been a lot of learning in how that's impacted our communities, in all of the work that's been done to there, which filters back up into the Scottish Government, and through that trying to build a model that works. That model has then been picked up, and the Kato Pacific Community Climate Fund is being built around that, trying to work with a different government within our region to try and create this system where we know that it's all about just trying to get that resources to our communities in a way that's really quickly and doesn't place much burden on them. There are so many other ways that we're innovating around our region too, and I'm only just realizing all this because I'm flicking through the attendees list and just remembering all of these things. Like the Banaban Human Rights Defenders, they're based in Rambi in Fiji and doing a whole bunch of work on climate forced displacement and the reclamation of their heritage and the island of Banaba, but also all of their cultural artifacts from museums from across the world. Such important things to be doing when we're thinking about loss and damage. And I'd also be remiss if I weren't going to sit here and not give ourselves a plug, because we're launching our own campaign, Our Power, in the next week. And that's to build momentum to pressure governments like Australia to power up safe and equitable renewable energy for communities, to ensure job security for workers, to establish fair training and migration pathways for Pacific people, to finance fossil fuel-free Pacific, and also to raise climate goals in 2025, because if we want to sound this pathway towards 1.5 carbon emissions, we know need to peak next year, which is 2025. And so we need to be pushing all of these governments to innovate in the way they are holding their climate goals. And so hopefully we can see more innovation outside of our region coming from the global north.
Freda, if you could just please unmute.
For
Thank you.
Vanuatu, we tried to do training and workshop, as I mentioned earlier, to stakeholders. And one of the things that we did was to make them understand or to feel what it's like to be in the shoes of persons with disabilities. So the two things that we include in our workshop is one is game of life, just to see how people with disabilities are being left out in information, shelter, wash, etc. And at the end of the game of life activity, we found at the feedback after the workshops or training, we found that participants have understood how people with disabilities are being left out due to that activity game of life. And also we try to insert in the shoes activities. Well, the reason why we insert those two activities is that for participants of our community members just to understand and feel how or why the reason people with disabilities are being left out in preparedness in disaster risk reduction. And also when we include them, they come to understand much better, and they try to do inclusiveness in the disaster areas, especially in preparedness. And also we have trained local OBD members. OBD is organization for persons with disability in the community. We try to make them do their own mapping just to see where they could go and find safe shelter during disasters. And I think it's becoming successful because one of the stories that came out was a member, or let's say a chairman of the local OBD in one of the rural areas. As we understand that rural areas compared to Port Vila and Sando, which is the main municipal areas, they go and find safe shelters in evacuation centers and schools and churches. But in rural areas, they don't have that because the schools and churches they use is evacuation centers are not safe. So one of the stories that came up was the chairman of the local disability organization in one of the outlets. He went and found 10 of the members, some of which has disabilities, and they went into a cave. The cave was accessible for them, and it's not a cave underground, but it's kind of the L shape, like, they went into the cave, and then on top of the cave, the disaster was, the wind of the cyclone came. So they were safe and hidden properly under the cave. So we were amazed that the members found, they implemented what they've learned in the communities and not being just sitting there listening to us, giving them information about safe shelters. So that's one of the things that we try to do with the rest of the local OBD members in Vanuatu, trying to teach them that they don't have to wait for us or the government to take response, but they take their own, they take the first steps to safety. So that was one of the successful stories because they hid in the cave for 10 days after the cyclone went, and they just came out all 7 sounds. So that's one of the things that we try to do in the whole of Vanuatu. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Freda. I'd also encourage you to, there's a wonderful comment made by Akmal. in the chat in response to your sharing. Thank you for being so generous with your experience and expertise. Now we'll move to our final question for all of you, and we'll follow the same sort of flow as well. How do you center and address the needs of marginalized communities in your work, ensuring no one is left behind? Mary.
Thank you, Fenton. You're talking about how I center and address the needs of marginalized communities in my work, ensuring no one is left behind. I'll speak from a writing perspective and then go on to cover the other art forms and the media, of course. Now, I think when it comes to writing, it's understood that writing is largely a solitary activity, that is creative writing. Journalism, media work, of course, it is solitary, but it's done in newsrooms unless you work alone and freelance. Now, I think when it comes to writing, we depend. I, for example, depend on tools and platforms, both digital and non-digital, to bring my work to the fore. So one way of centering marginalized people is that the creative work that I do has characters that are marginal, from marginal communities. So that's one way I think that writers of fiction do that. If you're a writer of nonfiction, then it would be a direct choice. You're highlighting and centering people who probably come from vulnerable groups. But in my case, of course, that's through characterization and also setting in the description of marginal communities. So in that way, I would say that my work does center marginal communities. Now, having said that, it's not enough for me just to write stories, because it wouldn't get anywhere. So that is where I depend on platforms to get published. That is challenging in the Pacific. So my way around it is to enter competitions or go on fellowships and apply for residency so that it gets out there. Now, has there been some success on that? I would say there's relative success around that. Because that way the work gets out. The other way is when tertiary institutions use your work in their curriculum in literature. So I know a couple of universities that use my texts in their literature classes or communications classes. So that's one way it gets out. I know that it gets workshopped in workshops in the CSO sector because I've been invited to take part in that, and that's where I center the characterization I'm talking about and have the opportunity to say where it's inspired from, because it comes from real communities, although we fictionalize. So I would say that's one key way I do that. Now, the other thing I would say is, while I'm touching on that, when it comes to the media, I think that maybe writers and creative artists need to work with the media a little more. So one example that I can give you is that both in Fiji and maybe the other Pacific Island countries, if you look at the gap is that we don't have a culture section in our papers. And when I'm talking about culture, I'm not talking about traditional culture only, but we don't have a culture section where we critique, for example, art. And I'm talking about literature, dance, performance, music that comes out. That champions these things. Now, the reason it's important to talk about these art forms is because artists usually draw their inspiration from marginal communities and marginal peoples, marginalized peoples. And that, for me, would automatically take the issues of challenges in freedom of expression, health justice, and climate justice straight to the center, together with these groups. So instead of the art forms being used only when these, say, health and climate draw artists in, the media becomes the platform where it can be there or on a regular basis, for example, the way other newspapers and television shows and all of that have it in other countries, in other regions of the world. So for me, that is, I would say, those are ways. So I've covered how I center it and also how we can potentially strengthen the centering of marginal marginalized people in communities and issues. Yeah, thank you.
Naka, thank you, Mary. Joe?
In our organizing, we always try and organize from the perspective that if we can make our work if we can focus on those who have the least access the most and first, then organizing for everybody else is just going to be easy. So we always start from a place where we're looking after the people who have the least access, whether it's like access to internet or capabilities to be able to join or to space, and make it, if we can make it accessible to them, then organizing for everybody else is always going to be easy for us. We also try and work to build partnerships and working relationships with different organizations to strengthen our intersectionality. And one example for that is that just recently in Tonga in the last month, we have a long-standing relationship with the Tonga Ladies Association, and the current president is on our board of Pacific Climate Warriors. The former president, the late Buli Kalepo Kefu, is also a really staunch climate activist and did a lot of disaster preparedness work through Red Cross. And through that relationship, we've always tried to strengthen the climate work, but also give a space for ladies to use our platform in order to be able to communicate. And so just recently at the most recent pageant that just happened, we came in as one of their sponsors, sponsored the category on recycleware, which is incredible to see people push themselves to try and think through how to incorporate climate into some creativity. And then the winner of their Sophia is now going to become one of their youth advocates that we can then help upskill and train and create a platform for her. And for us, it's like really reaching out into the community, finding people where they're at and bringing them into our space and being able to uplift them in that kind of way. And so our work is just that. We just always, from the principle, as we start with those who have the least, and then the rest is going to be easy for us.
Naka, Joe. Freda?
Yeah, thank you for VTP, which is the one of the disability promotion and advocacy. As the initial voice for people with disabilities, we try to get everybody involved. We keep on advocating in the rights for persons with disabilities. According to UNCRPD Article 11, which states emergency and humanitarian risk, we try to involve everybody. When I say everybody, I mean we try to address and advocate to the National Disability, sorry, not the National Disability, the National Disaster Management Office, which has a couple of clusters, so to say, WASH cluster, education cluster, shelter cluster, and so on. For the disability, it fell under gender and protection cluster. So we tried to get NDMO officers to be involved in our advocacy as well. Not only that, but we have the community. As we all know, like we can advocate to the national section, but we should involve more in the community as well, where there are people with disabilities are mainly at. So we involve community disability, community disaster climate change committees, which has disability weapons as a committee, and we try to involve them as well, because having everybody at one table, trying to make them understand and advocate for the rights of persons with disability according to Article 11, and they will come to understand, and not only understand, but to visually implement. We try to address the needs of each impairment as well, because physical impairments and needs are different to psychosocial and sensory impairments. So we try to make those who are involved understand and better implement those addresses to people with disabilities in Vanuatu. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Freda. Well, that wraps up our time on the panel. So I just want to take this opportunity to just give a massive, massive appreciation to our incredible panel. Thank you all for being so concise and so clear. It's obvious that while this panel was only 30 minutes, you have pulled from years of experience of doing this work with your full hearts. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of everyone to say we're so grateful that you made the time to share with us so generously. Now we'll move on to the second part of our time together, where we'll have about 15 minutes to make contributions in breakout rooms. And this is an opportunity for us to share knowledge, including stories of success, resilience, and innovation from within the region to build momentum towards the Commonwealth People's Forum 2024. Welcome back, everyone. Apologies if folks felt like they were cut off. There's always never enough time in these incredible breakout rooms. But I do want to welcome you back to the main plenary, and thank you for all the insights you shared in the breakout sessions. I hope that was useful for you and you felt like you had enough time to leverage it as best you could, especially as we collectively journey towards Samoa and beyond. I was incredibly lucky to spend a little bit of time in the different breakout rooms, and I just want to say it's a great way to start my day, to be in a room with each of you, the activists, the poets, the policy shapers, the practitioners. You all make up the heart of civil society in the region, and it's been such a gift to witness some parts of your work. As we sort of move to the close, I want to share with you a key insight from each of the rooms that was collected and documented. The first one is from the first breakout room with Joseph Sikulu. This conversation was around climate. The key takeaway there is we have to be thinking in an intergenerational way, which is the Pacific way, so that future generations don't have to start from scratch. The work is a continuum and knowledge must be passed on. Indigenous communities in the Pacific have been spearheading climate justice efforts and leading sustainably in the region for thousands of years, and yet their voices are silenced. The strength of our Indigenous knowledge should be respected and embraced. So thank you very much for everyone that was in Joseph's breakout room. The next key point I want to highlight is from Mary's room. And this one states that the Commonwealth should update its principles on media freedom to include digital media and artificial intelligence issues, and heads of governments should understand and issue a statement that the digital space is also a civic space with the same expectations and freedoms. This is the key takeaway from Samantha's room. This was on health justice. There is a need for stronger regional alliances that include the richer nations, including Australia and New Zealand, as well as to facilitate stronger dialogue. These nations must be called on to provide more grants for other Pacific states. We must also consider who decides where the funding goes. Grant money should not exacerbate the status quo, nor exclude Pacific Islanders. We need a people-centered approach and local actors in decision-making, as these decisions will directly affect us. And from the final breakout room with Gladys, there is a lack of opportunity to mobilize marginalized people in remote communities and enable them to connect and bring issues to the attention of our governments. We must consider how we can include people from the informal sector and rural communities in these conversations. For example, using storytelling, music, and alternative creative routes, because their voices are not being heard, because the voices from the margins are not being heard. Thank you again to each of you for your wonderful contributions and insights. I know the time allocated in breakout rooms might never seem like enough. So I do want to flag that there is a digital discussion platform known as the Online Discussion Forum that I encourage you to take advantage of. If you have not signed up already, please do join the Foundation's Online Discussion Forum. This is, of course, an innovative online discussion space for activists, practitioners, artists, and civil society leaders to sort of continue networking, continue sharing ideas, and hopefully build solidarity around the issues that we've discussed today. It's also an explicit invitation to continue these regional discussions on the platform as we continue our journey towards Samoa for the People's Forum. I'm hoping that someone who is working behind the scenes to make this event a success will be able to share with us a QR code at the end of this event, as well as a link to sort of click on and join. And of course, the social media. So we'd love to continue the conversation on social media, on Twitter and Instagram. The handles are the same, at Commonwealth.org. So please feel free to look out for that. Thanks once again to all of you for joining and for sharing so generously. It's been such a great start to the morning, and I know a great way to end the evening for many of you as well. And goodbye.